Hello and welcome to the Business Octopus, where we talk about all things sales, marketing, and technology. Today, I'm joined by LaSean Smith from the US. How you going?
I'm great. How you doing, Avon?
Not too bad, not too bad at all. So I am Avon CRM and marketing automation specialist at Relevate. And LaSean, you've worked in the investment space. You've done a lot with tech. You've got an investment portfolio and a company called .com. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, well, my background is software, kind of the intersection of media and software. So most of the software products I've built have had some type of media, video, or other type of angle to it. Over the years, I kept seeing these patterns, either companies undervalued or there were folks who were really just kind of positioning an interesting piece of our tech at the wrong market and really kind of looking at that as an opportunity. About a year ago, I shifted from investing on the side to investing full time because when I've done probably about a little over 30 angel investments, and I had done other side investments on the private side in the past, and probably 40 some odd checks cut. And that means, that's a lot of people you talk to. And what I realized was if you're not trying to deploy capital too quickly, there's a lot of great deals out there, but you can learn so much around what works and what doesn't work for a business. And typically I find that it's usually not the product that's broken, right? Like if the product's not good or the team's not good, you're going to suss that out quickly, many times minutes into a conversation. What typically is broken is the operators have either picked the wrong market or they have the wrong go-to-market plan. And a lot of that can be fixed with the right process, but many times people think, oh, I need to add another feature or I need to work with engineering or design to change the way this looks. And many times it's how are you engaging? What are your go-to-market activities? And are you actually focused on the customer that matters? So what I spend my time doing nowadays is trying to learn as much as possible in areas that can be impacted with automation. And if so, then I kind of dive into a traditional buying process. But the real goal is to find those opportunities where structurally the product is sound, but the go-to-market and potentially the market positioning is in need of some tuning.
So as a process engineer, you're a fan of that automation side. So in terms of automation, it's a bit of a buzzword. Where's the separation between like getting it conceptually right and then just finding the, plug-in or something to use?
Well, there's definitely an order of operations. That's the way I like to look at it, where the beauty of AI is it's forcing people to think process first. And if you go way back into, kind of the 1950s where this got popularized, there would be these consultants that would go into a manufacturing plant and they would do these process studies, and they'd have like a clipboard and a little stopwatch, and they'd be calculating this is how long it takes to make X, number of Coca-Cola bottles or something to that extent. And they would find all these inefficiencies. It's like, oh, if you put a person right here or you change the way this angle is, and they'd find all these seconds to shave off, and then that would increase the throughput. And that's how they would justify their consulting fees. Once we get to the 80s and the 90s, a lot of that falls out of popularity. People don't know that type of work is happening. And what do? We start solving these things with knowledge workers, and we try to digitize as much as the paper process. What I love about this current wave of AI kind of crossing into a broader audience is people are like, oh, I probably need to get my process sorted out before I go figure out what I'm going to automate or where I'm going to outsource to some AI workforce. And so all those old school frameworks, like this is decades of research that we don't have to reinvent. And like, I really love that so much of that is already proven because it's how we manufacture cars. And so, the SaaS company that I own is probably much lower stakes than, a vehicle on the road. And I love to look at all that history and then say, what does that tell us? You need to define your process. And anyone who, can articulate their key processes very, concisely, that is the first sign that there's some process optimization that can be put in place. And then I also find for early stage businesses, let's say in the software space, so many times we'll talk about annual recurring revenue, but regardless of your industry, let's say you're at $4 or $5 million a business. If somebody says they're doing 5 million, I'm going to use US terms here for this conversation. If somebody says they're doing $5 million worth of business and then they tell me that they got all these processes, like that sounds like crazy talk. If you have multiple product lines, you start breaking into 8 digits of revenue, like maybe you can start having this conversation. But if you're in single seven, you're doing 7-digit numbers, you should be as close to one process as possible for sales, delivery, and support. Now, the more folks kind of look at this flow and say, oh, but you don't understand my industry, I need to do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, you're playing the game on hard mode. And so I really love kind of starting with process documentation. You don't have to, there's software companies that will help you document your process. You don't even need to do all that. You just go open a Google Sheet or a Word doc and you go type this stuff out. And then kind of the punchline to your question is, once you have a good understanding of what that is, you should be able to put targets that has a target value to it that says next week, next month, we expect this metric at this part of the process. And it becomes very easy through that lens to go and look at whatever is in the AI news and say, does this particular company help solve this metric? So that way you're not trying to figure out, what does this new company mean to my business? No, what does this company mean to this task at this step in your workflow that encompasses your process?
I like using it like a numbered dot point list.
And if you get too many nested pieces in there, you're also probably doing something wrong where you're overcomplicating it.
Or sometimes even, just doing less. Like I remember I did a review of one company and they had like at the end of a 38-step process was like signing the purple book. I'm like, where is it? Why do we do that? Who signs? What's the outcome of that? Like you could just cut that process off altogether. So I think in terms of, process design, some of the concepts like old world concepts like the Kanban board, everybody looks at it in a software program and goes, oh, that's so cool. Like that was designed in the 50s by Toyota, before the computer was even really prolific. Kanban board was bits of paper on a board that got moved forward. Some of those concepts don't die. So why don't we jump into our actual questions? How do you identify your ideal target?
The first thing I'll kick off with is when I see a business that maybe someone's early stage and they're looking for me to take a minority stake, or it's more private equity and they're looking to sell the business. In both cases, I don't love to do turnarounds. I'm looking for folks who are just emotionally or from an age stage kind of ready to get out of the business, or they've been doing something and it's flat. And I give that as an asterisk because many times I see businesses where someone has built the product and it can be fascinating. It can be technically accurate. I've seen some direct to consumer products that are just amazing. I've seen agencies where their visual designs are like so fantastic. But then I'm like, all right, tell me how you sell this product and who do you sell it to? And that's where it all breaks down. I'm always looking to define the market, then go validate your go-to-market, and then go figure out how you improve, delivery if it's a service business, or product if it's product. So with that context, let's start with what is a market. A market is a group of individuals who share a recurring, urgent, and painful problem and have the willingness to pay to solve, right? And what I'm attempting to do, I'm trying to figure out, all right, what work did you go do to actually go validate this? In the Lean Startup, many folks know that book. The author, he really just took a bunch of other frameworks that have already been proven. And so I love these books that aren't necessarily coming up with a novel idea. They're taking old principles and saying, here's a modern way to think about these tried and true pieces. And really that's a book about iterative development and iterating your way to finding success, right? And so for folks who are not familiar with that book, it really talks about a different way to build a company, but more fundamentally, there in that first section, it talks about customer development and the process of figuring out if you've built something people want to pay for. And it's easy, especially in low capex businesses, so businesses that don't need a lot of capital to start. It's easy to kind of just get going, like not have a ton of process and pick the market that is going to pay you less for the same work, where you could just kind of like point it 45 degrees in a different direction. And now you're going to be able to do the exact same work at 2x the price. The actual execution through this process starts with what I call 100 conversations. And so I want everybody to go and talk to 100 people, but the goal is to get yourself uncomfortable, because here's what's going to happen. Let's say you run a web development agency. It's pretty easy to go get a domain, farm the company. Like you could do all the transactional stuff. You're like, I'm in business, but there's all sorts of people who do that type of service. Like, do you have you probably heard this term problem story fit? Well, you can't tell the right story if you don't know who your market is, right? Because you don't know what their pain point is. So the purpose of these conversations is to first get through your friends and family list, because somewhere around, conversation 17, 23, some point, you're going to get stuck. So the obvious thing is like when you have a conversation, use it as an opportunity to say, are there two people you could recommend? And so that helps the spider web, right? But what you're trying to have in these conversations is not, do you want to, if we use this web development agency example, do you want, web development agency services? It's talking about what are your pain points? What's top of mind? There's the biggest pain point, and then hopefully that leads to a conversation where you're not leading the witness and you're really having a conversation. What's the most broken in this person's brain or their business, where they're just like, if I don't solve this, I don't know if this whole thing works works out. And these can be short 15-minute conversations. They can be as long as 45, 60 minutes, but they need to have some type of time box, because another important thing I believe is you don't pay a marketing agency or someone to go facilitate this for you. You need to go hunt and get somebody to commit to talk to you for free. The other thing this does is once it gets you out of that initial wave of people, now you're at, person, 37, 43. You really have to get good at your messaging, because now you're doing the equivalent of cold outbound, right? Because you're just like, I got to get these people to pay attention to me. Like, who are you? Why should I listen to you? And then around 50 or 60, and this is like almost every time, this is fascinating. The thing you thought you were going to build in conversation 5 and conversation 65, it's just different. And so this piece gets skipped so many times. And because people don't do it up front, they have all these proxy activities that they try to insert later in the process that are way more expensive. And it's a huge struggle, I think, for folks to mentally really believe that like that needs to be step 0. And, throughout this process, what I really love that you get as a byproduct. So let's say you get to 100. I actually use for myself 120, because I always find like, have a little extra and I'll get some extra anecdotes. Once you finish these, hopefully you've documented them and, properly. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet or some type of CRM, but this also becomes the base. So you don't have those conversations, say, thanks for the time, never talk to them again. You should figure out what's the appropriate cadence for your industry and the relationships to follow up. They don't want to be bombarded just like, all these things, but people love it when they say, Jessica, thanks for that call 3 weeks ago. I've taken that to heart. I'm incorporating that into this new business I'm developing. Here are the early results. Would love to see if you wanted to try this for free for, 2 weeks or a month or what have you, right? And the next step there is kind of obvious, right? You now turn these people into your early potential funnel. And I love this thing called a dollar contract. I want to go back to that list of 100 conversations and I go ask them, hey, again, thank you for this. You shape what this product or this service has become. I'd love to give you this service for $1. Again, if it's a service based and it has some real costs, you just kind of time box it to kind of keep it manageable. If it's physical product, there's all sorts of ways where you can do this, but legit $1. And it's not free though. You don't say I give it to you for free, because you want to test like ACH the money. Do they have to send it over a Stripe or Paddle or whatever it is? Test this whole thing out. And for your first 5 to 10 customers, it's $1. Yep. And people are like, well, I can't just be selling my stuff for $1. Like, well, you have no examples that this works. So those first 5 to 10 become your base. And I'm kind of underscoring this piece because I hear folks sometimes say, oh, my system's working, I just need to optimize it. And then people are like, how do I even get going here, right? Like how do I get the ball rolling? And so once you have that, now you have those folks, and then you just ramp up your pricing, 25, 50, 75. And then once you're at about 20 customers, you're back at your rate card. But now you have this deep bench that serves as another piece, which it's your social proof, right? So now your salespeople have this collateral, or it's just like, it is very easy to understand that this thing works because look at all the people lined up here that say this is great. That's kind of the journey through that process. 2 other quick things to talk about through that is at the end of that, and I think this is requisite for whoever is in control or responsible for outbound. It might be the CEO, it might be head of sales, it might be the CMO, whoever is responsible for kind of overall messaging and the story of the company. You should go take those conversations. And again, you're trying to be honest with yourself. Those are going to shape whatever is going to become your product or your solution. And then instead of writing a internal PowerPoint document that says, here's the summary of these results, you write a manifesto that is going to be intentionally public facing, that takes that whole journey, and you write that in a narrative. And this could be as short as 2 pages. It could be as big as, maybe a dozen pages, but it's not going to be super long, but there's enough meat in here where it's really valuable. And you're going to be honest, and you're going to say, this is why we're in business. This is what we learned along the way. This is what we thought we were going to do. We got inspired by customers, and now we think this is the problem to solve. And by the way, here's like at the very end, like here's the thing that we're going to make. But the bulk of it is, here's this unique insight that we've discovered on something that's broken in the market. And you're writing it through the lens of someone who's reading this is like, oh, I have that problem. Oh my goodness. Like, yeah, like that happened to me. And this becomes the basis of so many other marketing assets. So now you're not guessing. Like, this is rooted in real customer feedback. And this becomes the artifact you use to write ad copy, to create your email drip, to do any of your outbound email outreach, call scripts. Like all of this stuff is like rooted in this this summary from these 100 humans. And it's just so powerful because this is so cheap. And even if you're not a great writer, you could hire an agency or somebody to help you kind of pull this together. But the goal is to really share this in public. And for folks who have a more of a low touch sales funnel, they can also use this as a lead magnet to then book calls or other types of activities. And so there's just a lot of goodness that you can get out of this artifact. That's the super high level of this process. A couple other quick tactical things that I've done in the past is once you have the manifesto, you can also go run fake landing pages and fake ads under a different brand. And so this is something I see when companies get a little larger. Let's say someone's like, hey, LaSean, like Lightwork, like we're way past that. We're at like 15 million ARR or whatever the number is. If you don't have this, you should go figure out, what your team should go do to kind of create this, because a manifesto is a living document. You're allowed to, kind of shift and change this over time. But if you have zero document, it's something that, folks may want to go create. But regardless of when you created the document, once it exists, something I've tried that's been very effective is if you're afraid to go try a new landing page or try a new ad, something that you can get feedback, near instantly, in hours or days of running some type of campaign. You just go create a secondary brand name and go get real data. And the goal is never to use any of these reactions, but you're trying to figure out, does this copy work? If you're in an organization or you're the steward of a brand and you're like, I don't want to break this, and there's paid ads or something that's just a true lever, right? It's not like, you wouldn't do this with organic or content marketing or something that has a very long lead time and has a high kind of trust barrier where like that would be silly to do. But you get so much goodness because instantly you're like, all right, I'm basically A/B testing this ad copy based on my manifesto, and it's zero risk because there's no product at the end of this. You could route it to a competitor, do whatever you want to do. And so I love these types of tactics because it removes the excuses we have where it's like, no, we need to move more slowly because we don't want to damage the brand. Don't worry about the brand. Make sure your funnel works. So anyway, that's the high level. And I really believe that if you can get smart with the customer development process, it sets up everything else to succeed. And it's going to give people in the team more permission to move and kind of, automate things, optimize things through this same lens. And almost true definition of a manifesto, like the reason each team member says, this is why I'm here.
Yeah. You need a non-threatening way to try and get people to meet with you and talk with you. So getting market feedback is a great lead generator. And then the $1 thing, like when people put their money where their mouth is, you'll quickly find out who's not going to do that. So
if you're selling a higher ticket kind of enterprise sell or something that has multiple stakeholders in a company, many times the procurement process or something else is going to be a headache. Then people don't want to really give you the real reasons, like we don't have enough budget or there's some other reason. It all slows down. You're looking at your pipeline. You're like, I thought pipeline was healthy. And like, oh my goodness, like where did all these prospects go? When you use the dollar, and again, you're only going to use this for your first, very early stages, not just of a new company, but also of a new product, right? So it's not just about like, well, we're already in business. You can use this for expansion as well. But when you do the dollar, it forces them to push you through the procurement system. So another kind of side hack is you go find something that has value beyond $1. So there is no conversation on budget is the issue. There is no conversation, is this valuable? You can use it as a wedge to get into that account. And like this is super valuable because now the accounting team, procurement team, legal, whoever has to go look at your contracts, they've had to go through this whole process. And now when you're like, hey, I got this thing for $15,000, there's so fewer people involved in the conversation at that point because you've already kind of checked off all of their internal process buckets.
That's a pretty clever idea. I've seen it before where, you get like coaches and consultants and things like, and they say it's $50, but only $1 today. And then the rest will get charged in 30 days time or something like that. Or
exactly.
Or just before the session. So you've got time to cancel. So there's a commitment psychology. And then there's the procurement side, which is, I don't think most people think of. In addition to the $1, you can probably even ask for a Google review, which is to your point about social posts, social proof, because I think third-party evidence is much better than you saying, I can help people and I get an outcome for you. But if someone else says, oh, this person helped me, it was amazing, 10,000 times better. So
100%. And a couple quick things there. I've been looking, we start off, talking about what I do in my day job. I've been looking for a company that does testimonials. One of the popular kind of for the smaller market is a company called Testimonial. And I love that story because it's a solopreneur who, he's a coder. And I think now he has 2 or 3 people helping him out. His business isn't for sale, unfortunately. But what I love about that business category, and there's others in the space, but just a shout out
Mm,
to folks who have kind of solved this problem really well with a really clean solution. What their platform does is, or his platform does, is you can collect video and then you can embed these all over the place. You can put them in email drips, you can put them on a video wall on your site, you can use them, kind of below a VSL, a video sales letter. Like, you can do all these different techniques with them, but also they allow you to pull written comments from other platforms. And so if you're on X, they can actually pull, and the beauty there is like you can click through, right? And when you click through to that LinkedIn, now you're actually on this person's LinkedIn. So there's this additional level of credibility. Like, this isn't just some random name and an avatar that someone grabbed. You can actually click through and see who left this comment.
mm,
And it's so powerful, especially for folks who have a high consideration product. You can just
mm,
short the line and say, oh, here's a dozen people who have already kind of seen
mm,
this. And when I've looked at the analytics on these things, people don't usually get past the third or fourth video.
mm.
Psychologically, they're like, okay, I get it. And so, it's just a very powerful tool. And I'm surprised that there aren't more people in this space. And this is one of the reasons that I'm very interested in social proof as a key enabler in the sales pipeline.
Mm.
But however you solve it, you can roll your own solution here. You don't need to buy anything from someone. But that social proof is very valuable. And last thing I'll say about that is this has been around for decades. Like, what people
Mm.
used to do is they would go find their best customers and they would send a video crew and they do a talking head video. And it was just so expensive. But
Mm.
now you can just do this with a webcam or your phone. And I would
Yeah.
argue the low quality, authentic hold the phone is actually more valuable than the highly polished, well lit talking head video. And so I love that the psychology has remained the same, but we
Mm.
found a much more economic way to pay it off.
Yeah, I definitely I get everybody just to hold like in landscape mode and then shoot themselves, and
Yeah.
then I whack it on YouTube, and then I can post it on landing pages, in emails, and there's also value on it just being, on your social channels. So there's a lot of, and then you get all the read metrics and analytics and things like that from how many times people have viewed that piece. So it just gets
Yeah.
more and more powerful. Being able to write that manifesto gives clarity, and the fact that it's public, I think, is a great idea. I think that a lot of times people want to have this polished vision of what their brand ultimately is, but the harsh realities of, hey, we had to stumble along on the early days to make stuff happen so that we could be a big polished business. I think sometimes people are okay with you being human, or even with your brand being human. That part of that story is actually cool. Like, if you've ever read Tony Hish, it's the shoe brand, I forget what it's
Zappos.
named. That's the one. We went to the office and checked out, and you're like, everyone's got their own desk. There's all this like stuff hanging from the ceilings, and they have parades. And I think someone had a birthday party and there was cake and just some crazy stuff. But, they build up to that because they created a movement, and,
Yep.
it wasn't always perfect. Sometimes they're on a sales call and the people can hear over the phone, oh, there's just a parade going on because it's someone's birthday. And that's noise that would seem like bad customer service, but the customer gets on board and they think it's fun and exciting too. So involving people is always a great idea.
Yeah, bingo. And the last thing I'll say on that is, beyond that initial work, this is something when I was working in big tech that we use quite often, is to leverage some of those folks to form a customer council. And so, having good customer signal can keep folks engaged. It can actually obviously make the product better. So, if you're partnering with other folks in your company on the actual product or the service, that's great. But having a small council, so if you're a smaller business, it's only 8 to 12 people. If you're a mid-sized business, you might have a few dozen. But the power of these councils is that they stay engaged. Now they're part of this journey. Now they're rooting for you. And so if you do get a bad piece of press, or you do get a poor review, or you do get all these things, you have folks who can go and kind of root for you because they see the whole story. Just tying this to what's done sometimes in B2B. One of the things I learned early in the process when I start working with, larger creators and things, I was like, how are you guys hacking this? Like, as soon as you drop this video, this thing goes. And they're like, oh yeah, we just have this group of folks and we drop the link in the Slack and we make sure they watch the whole thing through. All right. And then when they post their video, they drop in the Slack and we make sure we watch the whole thing through. And there's enough geo coverage, and it's a real watch. It's not a bot farm or anything like that, that it gives it enough to start getting recommended. Now, if the video is not good, the video is not going to continue to perform. Yeah. But that's an example of a super tactical way to activate, some type of customer council, is that you can have go take some action in concert to go drive, some forcing function on a platform you don't necessarily control.
And yeah, like numbers beget get numbers. So like we have this herd mentality of where you see one person, then you see two, then you have an early majority, and then you have the main body. But that concept happens literally on everything. And there's a
Yeah.
few tried and tested concepts. Like we talked about, I have a concept of everything as a pipeline. So whether that's ideas, whether that's processes, or whether that's, changes to systems or whatever. The same is like your content that you're putting out there. And, in terms of like numbers begetting numbers, there was a guy did a TED talk, and he's at a concert. This one person that's dancing, everybody else is sitting down. This one person's like going nuts on the grass, and for like a good 5 minutes. And one guy gets up, decides to join him. And then it's like another 30 seconds before there's like a 200-person crowd
Oh, I love it.
dancing along, because one person decided to join, and now there was a trend and a crowd. That snowball effect, it happens, is a real thing. So
Yeah.
I think it's really
So
good.
often. Yeah, there was this old saying back in the day where no one got fired for buying IBM. Even if it wasn't the best, it was socially accepted across professional circles and industries that if that was the deployment, you at least wouldn't
Yeah.
get fired. And, for better or worse, a lot of these behavioral nudges that we're attempting during a marketing or sales cycle has to do with psychology. And it doesn't matter if the person's a CXO, they're still a human. And so, one of the things that I love, I had some time working in consumer apps and games. The same techniques that you can use making a game or a consumer app, they work on enterprise customers as well, because we're all just humans.
There's, I don't know if you've heard much about Australian news recently, but that same concept of no one gets fired for hiring X was for one of the major consulting firms, PwC, and they got in trouble because they kind of played both sides with some tax legislation, and now that's causing the government to question all of that. So sometimes these concepts change, and like you say, the person buying is still a human. And one thing about buying statistics and procurement is that the average age of a procurement officer is going down. Like it's probably about 35 now. So these are people that watch Facebook, listen to
Yes.
YouTube. They're motivated. They listen to podcasts. They want to do something different and new and kind of make their stamp. Sometimes you don't get that same old buying process. The process has changed because the people have changed.
Yeah, totally.
Which kind of leads us in, how much can you automate or streamline your processes?
Yeah. So just quickly connecting it to that last point, everyone, at the leadership level, whether you're a small company and it's just co-founders, a couple dozen employees to kind of mid-size, like wherever you're at along that spectrum, if your revenue, as I say, is in single digit millions, you should have as close to a single process as possible. And when I say single process, I like to say sales, delivery, support. Yes, there's marketing and sales. And so I'm coupling those together. Yes, if you make a physical product, that's different than if you're in professional services. But ultimately, it's I kind of see most of the businesses that I have visibility kind of fall in those three buckets. And it kind of speaks to that old Peter Drucker quote, the management consultant. Like the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer, period. And it's just very crisp, right? It means all these other ancillary side departments at a certain scale of humans, you might need them, right? Because that's how you get all the humans to get together. But really, you make it or you sell it. Nothing else matters in the company. This is why, I think so often for early stage investments, you'll see venture capitalists say, we want somebody who is the subject matter expertise, in tech, it might be, we want a technical co-founder, and we want somebody who's on the hook for sales. And that might mean selling to customers, recruiting employees, selling to investors, but selling and making is it, right? Everything else is noise. And so if you can force yourself to have great discipline, that it really can be that simple. If you have a great product, then it's a lot easier to start talking about how do you automate. And this is really important to underscore, because a lot of folks, as they say, they just don't have a good sandwich. Like the product is not good. And so they're doing all these marketing activities to go do this. And I think, that's the reason you see, more popularity around product-led growth and some of these other concepts. It's like, let's just make sure the product inherently is good enough. So when we put the sales engine on top of it, it just goes. But you can only do so much if the sandwich is, isn't good. But back to your question, once you have that process, for me, I'm super, super obsessive over what is the simplest thing that has the lowest calendar cost and brand, customer trust risk. I use a definition of trust. That's the ability for someone to predict your future behavior, right? And so I don't look at trust as good or bad. It's just if you establish the wrong trust with the customer, you may never get them back, in a financial capacity. And so don't break the trust, and make sure, when I worked at a big company, we had this concept of a two-way door, and it was, a decision that you could make and then you could reverse it, and like no big deal, right? And so I'm trying to find as many low calendar cost two-way doors as possible. And I am trying to run an experimentation engine, right? And so one of the things I've done, getting very tactical, is I had a VA, and she was quite good. And so I was thinking she was going to become maybe my chief of staff. And I effectively said, hey, listen, what I'd like you to do is just go through all of our documentation. It wasn't a ton, but maybe a couple dozen pages, and just make a list of all the things that there might be a SaaS product for us to automate. And I'm thinking kind of autopilot when I'm using the word automate. I know for some folks, they're thinking this kind of trend of co-pilots where there's like maybe a chat pane or something on the side. No, I'm talking like remove the human, right? Maybe the human approves at the end, reviews at the end, routes at the end. So these are not standalone processes, but you're trying to get autonomous task completion. And so I just had to go through all of these pieces, and it was really interesting because, like, we were using the obvious pieces, Otter for logging, meeting notes for booking, like the no-brainer stuff. But what was happening is, like, we get off a call and we were like, hey, somebody send an email with this, or drop such and such in the Slack. And we're like, those were our friction points, right? Where somebody had to go move it to another system. And so we found a number of cases where it's just like, all right, we're going to move to, another system for all of our chat, so this all can be consolidated. And this might be sacrilegious to, some smaller companies, but we looked at it and we said, all right, we're going to move from Google Workspace to Microsoft 365, not because I think it's the best single product on any of those, but the core underlying data was so much easier to integrate that all the other hooks that we had in our system were streamlined. And so it took us maybe a month or so to like move to Teams. And like, even to this day, it's frustrating because I'm like, why does this thing work like this? But as soon as I get a report, or soon as something like I see an automation trigger like pop up in Teams, I'm like, that's why we do it. And then, when we need to plug into a third party, they have enough extensibility. And so just getting like hyper practical, like that's a real world product that we went in. And I don't have all the companies I invest in, like I don't force them to go make that move, but that was a very easy win. Now we're actually experimenting with some other things around support. We've basically trained any of the companies I have that support is async. So there's no phone number that you can call. But then the question is, if you could do something that felt more real time, or something that did feel like it was a different modality, is that a better service level? One of the things we're experimenting with is a live IVR system that's just using LLMs in the background to go actually have a real conversation. And so we're playing around with some different APIs, and the goal is not to go like build that as a product and sell it. My assumption is somebody out there is going to go make that as a very cheap service for us to go and buy, but we're going to have the internal data to know, is that something that's good for us or not? And so that's kind of the last piece of this kind of process hack, is sometimes you go do a very low cost R&D test to figure out, all right, I don't know if you're familiar with man in the box, but it's this concept of an invention back in the 1800s where it's like this magical box that could talk. There's actually a guy inside, right? For some of these, it's like, can you just go create that type of experiment to see if it's valuable? And then you just wait for the right vendor to come along to solve it. And we have maybe 3-4 of those types of scenarios that we're like just building a backlog that says like, all right, if somebody sells this for X dollars, like we are going to try to integrate this into our process. Throughout this whole piece, things can come and go, right? Because we're chasing these two-way doors. But anyway, those are, kind of diving into some like super tactical things. But as you can see, like these are not expensive decisions. These are tens of dollars and single-digit hours of one of your employees' time to go figure out, does this kind of remove the human friction? Does this increase high judgment? And that's another thing, through this whole process. It's not just, we need to get rid of the humans. Why, right? Maybe you're labor constrained. Maybe it is high judgment and you need to get a higher precision when that comes through. Maybe it's a throughput issue and you don't have enough capacity at a certain time. So I think part of the process, that's why I was talking earlier about your metrics and having targets against those metrics. If you have that, it's very easy to assess if a particular tool or vendor can solve that particular metric versus like, oh, here's this new thing that, generates voices that blah, blah, blah. Well, it's cool to chase, but if it doesn't map to a metric, it's probably something you can put on the back burner.
I'm always very bullish on what we can do to automate stuff. So, and that doesn't always mean buying the new shiny thing. And it sometimes means just using the things you've got. like Power
Yeah.
Automate, and it's really hard to measure the automation and the value of it sometimes. So like there is an element of, yes, we can count that, the guy with the stop that you were talking about before that can say, all right, this now takes us, 8 seconds instead of seconds. That's quantifiable, but then you've got to multiply that by the number of times that you do that in a year. And that might change. It might start small, but as you scale up, that then becomes very significant. I like that, asynchronous support is definitely high value. And in Australia, you've got Woolworths, which is like our major grocery store, and they do a lot of online orders. And they've got it now hooked into, I think they use SAP on the back end, but they've got it hooked in so that when you live chat and say, I didn't get my jar of mustard in my order, that it will look up the line item, it will refund the money, and no human touched it. Because even if it wasn't missing and you just happen to claim it, I think there's thresholds to say, like, if this person claims the most expensive item every
Exactly.
week, ban them. But you can easily, I think the profitability in that jar of mustard might have been like 18 cents or $1.80 or something like that. And so to have a human look at it, it's not even worth it. So just run the machine at it, and then have your tolerance levels, and then that's that higher processing or that higher engagement level for the human to deal with. And they've turned around millions, but it's not the fact that it's saved them money. It's now they're at a competitive advantage over somebody else because I can get immediate support instead of having to go to the shop next time. And then now that mustard's 1 week older, so even if I got it and I didn't like, it was the wrong brand or something, that there's like a whole return issue anyway.
Yeah, what I love about that example though is also the fact that, the promise of kind of big data, real-time analytics, and all these other things that folks have been talking about for a very
Mm.
long time. It's becoming more economically accessible to smaller companies. And it really speaks to this point that, there is value if you can find a way to organically group all of your data together. If you have them in
Mm.
all these disparate silos because you have maybe, different SaaS vendors, or you just kind of implemented things in a funky way, there's still ways to connect it. There's all these ETL and other types of services that will kind of move the data around and get it consolidated. But
Mm.
at the end of the day, the more you can kind of naturally get this all together, the cheaper it's getting to go make sense of it. So it's not just,
Mm.
hey, we reduce the cost of this mustard jar. It's now that we can run semantic analysis on this data set, and we can run all sorts of really cheap
Mm.
queries on this data set to say, like, is this really about mustard, or is it this customer segment, or like,
Yeah.
and because that would just get lost in the store if you just went to the cashier and like, hey, I want to return this mustard. You just
Mm.
have some SKU reconciliation you could do at some point. But getting more of this in an async self-serve, there could be
Mm.
that one question you ask, like, why are you returning it? And while that's very coarse, at scale that becomes super actionable.
And I think, like sample size matters. A lot of, you're talking about getting your 100 and you're going further and getting your 120. A lot of times people go, oh, I did this happened twice or 3 times. Now I'm going to make a
Anecdotes.
decision on it. You could have just got a bad set. Or, like when doing your automation process, personally, I have a concept of do it from the inside out, do it from what works. It's the
Mhm.
customers you already have, and it's nurturing them better. It's asking for reviews for people you've already worked with. Then once you've done that, maybe do some early stage, like proactive stuff or outreach, because a lot of times people go, I need more customers, I'm just going to spend a lot of money on ads, but they haven't gone and figure out what do they want. Then how do I then capture it? Where are my audience, and then what kind of ads going to resonate with them, and doing all that testing process. But even that as an automation process, the more money you spend on automating a crap process, like there's a movie that I constantly quote, and it's called Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. That is totally the opposite of what you should do when it comes to
Exactly.
investment
Exactly.
in software.
Exactly. And what I believe is the psychology behind that, on why that's so tempting for people, or why it's so attractive for people to believe that, even though I do agree it's a misnomer, is because many times you have expertise of some sort in delivering that service or building that product. And so that's the easy thing. And the idea that your CMO or your head of sales is actually the person that's going to make or break this business is like hard for somebody to get their head wrapped around, but that's true. And so hire somebody world class or go build that muscle. But there is no world where you get to make the best product and then your
Mm.
sales motion sucks.
Well, at the end of the day, you're building for your customer and not for yourself. What's the marketing saying is having no marketing is like wearing yourself in a dark suit. You get a warm feeling, but no one else knows about it.
There you go. I love that.
So So what processes make you more deal ready since you're an investor when people are looking for investment?
I love tactics on these types of questions because we could talk very abstract, but like sometimes it's helpful to use real things and people can
Mm,
extrapolate hopefully on maybe something that works for their scenario. But one of the things we've been doing is leveraging the Google Workspace API. So for email and calendar. And this sounds very trivial. This is one of these like small ideas where my brain's like, there's probably a product there, but I don't really have the time to go chase this down. Very lightweight set of scripts. And we track responsiveness, right? And found that like responsiveness matters in these deals. You don't need a ton of data to kind of do some very crude anomaly detection to kind of
mm,
say this is outside of the bounds. And we don't use that one data point to like penalize a deal. When I say we, it's usually myself, my chief of staff, and my business analyst. And so when we are looking at a potential deal, the way it flows is I'm likely actively looking at a space. So I talked about social proof. I'm right now actively looking at businesses that are for sale that are in that space or could be repositioned to that space. By the time we actually get a real deal in the pipeline, we're trying to move them as efficiently as possible to a no or a term sheet. I don't want to have a bunch of conversations and then it turns out this thing is a dud. They don't really want to sell or their price is ridiculous on their whatever they think their multiple should be. And so we are doing all these little tricks on how responsive are they. What is the quality of their documentation, right? So if we get to a point, and so the teaser is like the pre-NDA PowerPoint or doc that says like, hey, we're for sale, but didn't have all the stuff in it. And then if you're like, hey, I think there's enough here, maybe you have a cursory call either with the broker or with the operator, and then you sign the paper, the NDA, and then from there, what happens is you get access to this data room, and it's going to have bank statements, Stripe access, different things for you to go do some analysis. And again, this sounds very tactical. I just look in that data room, and if I'm like, the file names are named all any kind of way, there's like a weird like lack of cadence on the timestamps for when this report they said was their monthly report, like it doesn't look like it's coming in this, like I'm looking for the operational consistency and whether it's how they respond, how quickly they respond, the hygiene of their documents. These are all little small data points that help me figure out, all right, how well run is this? Because those are all moments of attention to detail. So that's like one piece that sounds kind of silly, but so many times I meet great personalities and it's just an operational mess. And it's like, all right, like you could probably make it work. But for me, I'm just not interested in the turnaround because that means you got to convince all the people who work there to become quality writers. You got to convince them to kind of up their digital literacy and kind of use these tools at a higher level. And like, that's a fairly heavy lift on the training and culture side that I'm usually not interested in. So that's one example of something that's very tactical, but it's very telling in kind of a very trivial way.
No, I like that. I like the technical skills and digital literacy. I think that's a severely underrated thing. And I think once you can really nail that, it has so much value because, one person can punch the weight of 10. They can, writing documentation, I'm huge on. It's even on my little Teams message to say, do and document. We are nothing without our process documentation. And every time we do write a document, I like we started really pushing on it at a certain point, and the amount of calls I got every 5 minutes, how do I do this or how do I do that, just went away to nothing. And to the point where I'm like calling them up and going, is everything all right? And they're like, yeah, I got it. I'm all on top of everything. And you get the numbers, you get the stats. And now it's just fun to talk to your people instead of like, oh, why haven't you done this yet? And haven't you done that yet? And can you do this? And like you build better relationships. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And just a quick sidebar on that. Years ago, I owned a failed salad shop. Yeah. I attempted to be in the food and beverages. So that's a hard business and we failed horribly. One of my proudest moments is the Yelp clipping that I took that says Fine Salads. That was the name of the business. And it says permanently closed because it taught me so many things about how to tackle this. But one of those principles was, to do it properly, to even keep that business open, we had to be really extreme with the SOPs, right? Standard operating procedures. And it's like the salad dressing is going to go bad if we don't do this. And when this happens with the lettuce, like you have to document all of these things. And when you see very simple businesses, you see this hyper structured process. And even though that business didn't work, I kind of transitioned and translated that back to how I think about running software companies. And it was super transformative because it's not like there's some big government bureaucratic planning process. It's just that if you have something in your brain, think it through, write it down, share it async, and find find times on the schedules to come together and have discussions. And that is the motion that I found to be a very consistent way to get some of the benefits of these other businesses. And you see why those businesses have to go run that way, because they have very thin margins. So they have to be hyper, operationally efficient. And so if you have a high margin business where you apply that type of efficacy, there's just all sorts of goodness that comes out of it.
Yeah, I think in terms of, it's not quite management by committee, but like having like you said, that you think about it, you write it down, you share it and asynchronously, and then coming together and then having like a mini board meeting where you kind of go through an agenda. One thing I found very quickly when, pushing all knowledge articles out into the world is that I have a lot of assumed knowledge. I know things in my vernacular and the way that I think they should be done. But when I share it to the team and they're like, I don't understand this. Okay, well, give me the feedback, write it on the form. Everything is a pipeline, including your knowledge articles, including your investment deal flow, including your hiring pipeline, and going through those sort of stages makes it really easy to basically handle high volume. So
quickly, I was going to say there's also some modeling behavior, right? When I worked at Microsoft back in the day, we had this leadership framework that was called Model Coach Care. And the goal is you model, you give people coaching in context. So you don't tell them 3 months later that they're doing something maybe they shouldn't. And then you do it with empathy, right? And that was the gist of the framework. But on the model piece, when you write these things down, people are like, oh, I'm supposed to write these things down, right? And I have a folder that we share with everybody across the teams. It's called Kager Memos, and it's me just writing things, and they're kind of clustered in two buckets. Like I really spent some time thinking about this, and these are in one folder, and then other things is like I had 2 hours and I was just writing. So this may not be final thought, or I might need more data to really get to conviction. But it's really powerful because I'll get links, and I never told anyone like this is how we should structure our memos. I'll get links, and it's like, hey, this is what I'm thinking on this ed tech thing that you wanted me to look in. And it's just following the pattern, right? So much of this is just modeling the behavior that you want others to do. And if it's coming from a genuine place, I think most folks, they want that type of direction while still having the autonomy to kind of fill in the lines themselves.
So, we've both got a veteran background. I was in the Army infantry, and we were doing a jungle warfare training in Malaysia. And so we had this like assault. So we had to assault the position on the hill. And so we had support fire from one direction, and then we were the flanking force to come around on a 90-degree angle and then assault through to the position. Anyway, our flanking force had to go through a marsh with like grass higher than me, and it was really thick and really wet. And I had all my pack and my webbing and my rifle, and then we couldn't get through it. So what I had to do is I had to throw my body onto the grass, crush it down one body length, stand up, run forward, do it again. And I had to do that for a good 100 meters. And the amount of effort and work, but that created a path for everybody else. Everybody else was just casually walking behind going, what's taking so long? But our team, we were the lead force, and we were just like absolutely shattered after. We laid down a path and we made it. And I feel like sometimes doing that is necessary in business. Like that's what it feels like as a business owner.
100%. I was going to ask a question to you. Have you found that people who, have some type of service background, or maybe people who play professional sports, or like I've tried to put my finger on what it is. Is it like team-based systems? But have you seen certain patterns from certain groups, like folks who have formerly served, that translate well to business?
Oh, absolutely. So we do a lot of work with veterans and veteran-owned businesses. And I find that not only do you sort of click on the relationship side, the systems, the structure, the processes, and it's like you have that shared vernacular or that shared concept of what, how to run a big organization. There's a lot of moving parts in the military.
Yeah, there it is.
They've been doing it for hundreds of years. So it's not like they've kind of just fallen into some unknown management structure. This is how you move assets and people in unknown places, in dangerous situations. It's an excellent building block for teamwork, for understanding hierarchy, for understanding what an org chart is, and then understanding, discipline and turning up on time and all the little bits, like there's a performer for orders, like there's an acronym we have, it's SMEAC, and pretty much we write everything like that. And we've got several veteran people that work with us, and I can just dot point out something and know exactly what to do, when, how, who, and the concept of left and right of arc or mission command. So when you're doing things and you're the central point of failure, the business can't scale. But mission command is, what the US and what the Australian generally do, whereas central command is more like Russia, China, Soviet bloc era. And by giving localized control, you can say, this is the outcome. This is the target end state that we want to happen. These are the resources you have. This is what you can't do. And they can come out with some amazing work. And that, as a concept, is management.
100%. I love that. Yeah, that's a
you're
great way
giving-
to concisely
yeah.
put all of that.
Yeah, you're just giving a direction and a strategy and saying, go for it.
I love it. Yeah. And I love that you could concisely articulate it too, because it helps, I think, maybe folks who are previously served kind of, if they hear this portion, they can kind of see like, oh, I do have this highly valuable skill set that can translate to this other space. And many times I'm looking for, these populations that don't always, get the articulation of like, no, you're super valuable over here if this is something that's interesting to you.
Yes, absolutely. So what are the processes that make you more deal ready when you're looking for investment?
Yeah, so this is kind of the reverse of the previous question. So, what do I look for? As I said, there's a bunch of simple financial exercises that you can do. You can also get on a call, and if you have, some decent EQ and interpersonal skills, you can assess the team pretty quickly. So those are the easy ones. But on the flip side, I think it's some of the similar pieces. The first point I would say is ask yourself, why do you want to sell your business? For anyone who is at a stage where maybe they're burnt out, there's all sorts of reasons where, someone might want to sell a good business, right? And so assuming those things are true, you have a good business and you want to sell for the right reasons. One of the first things I try to have folks tackle is, do you have anything that makes your business great that goes away when you go away? And there's two parts of that. There's the first one that's pretty obvious to anyone who's looked at deals. There's something called E, or seller discretionary earnings. And this is the dollars that you add back into the cash flow of a business, or you deduct from the business because the operator, the owner, was doing all that work and not paying themselves, right? And so that's a really important piece of math. And that's pretty standard. It can sometimes be this thing where you feel like you want to go to arbitration. So typically what you do is you go hire a CPA and you pay them for a day's worth of work, and they go figure out the math using comps and other things. And that way, I don't discount on my side and they don't mark up on the seller side. But so you can get that piece. But the other part that's a little trickier is there are many times certain types of certifications or classifications or something specific to the operator that is part of the sales pipeline that's really hard to financially model. So we're just talking about veterans. Let's say you own some type of company and a veteran was, his veteran status. And they were using that to go get more deals with the local government or what have you. Well, who are you going to sell it to? Like somebody who also is a veteran? Like you've just collapsed your market in a crazy way. And it's not always obvious in discovery initially. I've learned, like, I have a list of things that I go through, and I'm like, if I see any of these flags, I'm like, yeah, this is probably not something that we can double click on, because there's some magic sauce kind of baked into the operator / owner. So first is just kind of seeing if there's anything that makes you special, you the human special, that is going to discount. And I found there is no benefit trying to kind of hold back and committing lies of omission. It's just like, put all the dirty laundry up there, get to the no as quickly as possible. Because anyone who has a well-run system, the process is the same. You don't want to be wasting your operational time on a bunch of what are effectively sales calls with people who are trying to buy your company. And so get all your business out up front quickly, get your financials cleaned up. And by that, I mean, like, obviously, if you haven't paid taxes, whatever, do all that. But what I'm specifically talking about is, like, are your bank statements all organized? Are all of your tax filings organized? Are they all in like a way that you could zip these things up and drop them in a folder? Or is it like, oh no, I got to talk to Barbara and then she has to? Don't do that stuff when you're ready to sell. It's just like selling your house, right? You like, go get all the little knickknack before. And so those are some of the pieces. And then through that process, what I find is sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to sell, or I'm not ready to sell. And being very practical on what the multiple is on your industry. So you might think my business is worth 2 times revenue. Nobody in private equity is going to buy off of revenue. Now, if you are selling to a strategic, so maybe there's a company that needs what your company does, sometimes they have to overpay and they will sometimes buy on a multiple of revenue. But typically, you're selling on a multiple of cash flow. And again, if you don't know what your multiple is, you can reach out to a business broker. Usually they'll give this information for free that says, hey, I have a business. It's doing $15 million a year in top line revenue, and it does, $3 million in EBITDA or cash flow, and I'm in this industry. What do you think is the ballpark range for this exit? And if you hear a
Mm.
number that's just like, man, I'm worth way more than that, like maybe you're not ready to sell. Last thing I would say there is make sure that for whatever story or narrative you're telling, there's not a bunch of forward-looking events that need to be true, because unlike selling a startup, let's say raising capital from a venture fund, it's all about the story and the narrative. But if you just have a regular bread and butter business, it's all about what you've already done. And so you can't say, hey, in the next 6 months, this whole thing's going to hockey stick, so you should give us, extra 1x on our cash flow. It doesn't work like that when you're selling to private sources. So these are like, I'm just kind of hopping in on some very specific things, but you'll see the general theme here is make sure you're emotionally ready and make sure you have the tactical hygiene in place. And then that's going to allow you on the seller side to quickly get to a point that says, do I even want to sell this? Like, will they even be a good steward of this asset that I've created? For some older folks or people who have really put blood, sweat, and tears into it, they don't want to sell to certain types of companies. And so you want to go figure out, like, why do you guys want to buy this? It's just a roll-up strategy, squeeze out the dollars. Do you want to keep these jobs? Are you going to fire my people? So these are also things that you can kind of work into the flow. But as you can see, if you think about the stress that could come with selling a house or something like that, the more you can get the house ready and do all of the transactional and logistics stuff before you have to go through that emotional stage, like the better. And this is no different.
Yeah. I think in terms of getting people to sell a business, a lot of times by the time they get to the broker sold them some story of how they're going to sell and how much they're going to get. And, because the broker wants to increase their commissions. And then in
And the
their
broker
mind,
will have them shut it down. I've seen that happen twice where the broker told some crazy story. I was like, no way this business is, and like one of them, we had a side conversation with owner. And I was like, listen, we already sent you guys our term sheet. I don't need you to sign it. I'm not going to try to have a weird side conversation where I need you to go skip your broker, but we're not moving that number. And so as you guys get out there, if you want to come back in a few months, as you take a look at things, let me know. And he was quite nice. I was trying to buy a roof repairing company and I checked back in and he's like, yeah, no, everything's good. And it was like clear, like, it's like, all right, not really the time and engage. And then I reached out and I was like, hey, what's going on? And they said, yeah, we're shutting the business down. Right. And they had putting a bunch of things in motion. Kind of the structure of the business fell apart. Some key folks left. Like it just kind of like unraveled because like psychologically he had made up in his mind that he was done with the business. And so he wasn't running the business properly. And yeah, he got a goose egg. Like it went to zero.
Yeah. Wow.
Just crazy.
I have a concept of you can't bank on good intentions. Like everybody goes, yes, yes. They're like the preacher, and it all falls apart. So you've really got to be very careful. I guess the last one is less of a question, I guess more of a call to action, but going out and assessing your development process. So I just thought I'd pop in some of those before we leave. In terms of going out and assessing current customer development process now, what are the 3 things you want to leave, I guess, our listeners with on what they can do?
Yeah, well, this is something that I was exposed to when I was very young, but the number one thing is really allow yourself to fall in love with what the customer wants from you and not the thing you've dreamed up in your head. And I know that's a mindset thing, but like that is so critical because that lets you get to number 2, which is really embrace this idea of not just having process, but really tying it back to everything you do. So if you state your long-term company goals, your annual goals, your quarterly goals, your weekly rhythm, all these things should be connected to the experiments you're running and you're letting that lead. And the goal should be to go solve what the customer wants. You really need to go, get folks on board. And then the last thing is I used to say move fast to people, and it didn't dawn on me that I had come from a background that was moving at a different pace. And what I like to tell folks now is, big companies move in months and years, medium-sized companies move in weeks. And if you're a small company trying to use size to your advantage, you need to move in hours. And if that's not the pace at which you're moving, you can break your problems down to smaller problems. There's all sorts of ways to go tackle that without stressing yourself out, but you're probably not moving fast enough. And if you connect these all together, you're building what the customer wants, not what you want. You're really tying process back to the goals to measure that as successful. And you're breaking down these processes small enough where you can run experiments and iterate your way to success. You will create a flywheel that's going to compound, and that's going to allow you to, get your business as big as you would like. You might hit some other hurdles where you have talent gaps and you need to get good at hiring great people and all those types of things. But the flywheel will absolutely compound if you can get those 3 three things right.
So it's like the software development cycle, agile method being overlaid onto a business.
100%. Like, I don't care if you say like, well, LaSean, I run a large scale commercial janitorial company. Yes. Okay. Like nothing changes right now. You might not be iterating and this is probably the whole conversation. It's a good way to kind of sum a lot of this up. You might not be innovating on the product, but you can still keep getting that 1% a day improvement on your go-to-market and your process, right? And like those things, like, can you increase the quality of service? Can you increase and deliver things faster? Like there's all sorts of things where, if we use the janitorial service, like you can clean this building faster, you can clean a different type of building. Like there's always a way to keep pulling at the thread to say like, what does the customer want to pay to solve? What process can we put to, solve that repeatedly? And then how can we iterate and experiment our way to making that process more efficient? That is the combo, regardless of industry. The asterisk is, there are certain regulated industries, maybe law or medicine. So I'm not an expert there, but the vast majority of businesses, this will apply.
To give people some ideas on some of those other elements, you maybe could create a process to have your day sales outstanding reduced, or maybe you can find a way to make it quicker to hire because you've got some templates, or onboarding better people. Those micro improvements that relate to creating a better service and creating the better outcome, but it's not changing service directly. Yeah,
exactly.
You still clean the mirror like this, like
Cool. And the last thing I'll underscore there is, the culture and the vibe of your employees, they matter. And when you deliver a better onboarding experience, they see you're actually living your values. Like all of those things also compound into them delivering a higher quality service or better customer engagement. And so while those may feel like extra intangibles, those count too over time. And so they're not just the math numbers up front reasons to go do this, but there's also, the longevity of your talent. If you are getting, if you're turning over your talent every 2-3 years, like that's super dangerous because you're now basically building a new company every 2 or 3 years. And so a lot of this is also about how do you keep the right people engaged on some type of shared mission.
Well, thank you so much. Like we've covered a lot here. I really appreciate you coming along. If you've been listening and you like what you hear, you can check more about LaSean and Kager.com at the website, or you can check him out at LaSean Smith on LinkedIn. If you want to get any more tips and tricks, you can always join us in the community at community.relevate.com.au. And for those listening, take care.